They lined them up in the middle of nowhere. 31 people. 5 families, hands bound, feet bound, only their mouths left free. Maybe so the hundreds of prisoners forced to watch could hear them scream. A single soldier stepped forward, pulled out a pistol, and one by one, at point-blank range, shot all 31 of them in the head. No trial, no lawyer, no last words. Just 31 lives erased in minutes because one member of their family had tried to escape from prison the night before. That person was already dead. But in North Korea, blood is a crime. Shared blood is a shared sentence. So 31 people who had done absolutely nothing paid with everything they had. Their bodies were left exactly where they fell, not buried, not covered, left as a message, a warning carved in flesh for every prisoner watching. This is what freedom costs your family. This is what one person's dream does to everyone who shares your name. And the soldiers who pulled those triggers felt no guilt. They felt righteousness. They felt love for a supreme leader so deeply embedded in their psychology that murder in his name felt holy. That is the real horror of this story. Not just what is done to bodies, but what is done to minds first. In North Korea, there is no free press, no open internet, no foreign films or outside music. Nothing enters that hasn't been filtered and weaponized by the state. What exists is a sealed media universe with one purpose: to make every citizen believe their supreme leader is not a man, but a god. He doesn't sleep. He weeps at night over his people's suffering. He collapses from exhaustion because he cares too much. Every teacher repeats it. Every screen confirms it. Every neighbor believes it. And when a lie is told loudly enough, long enough, by everyone around you, it stops being a lie. It becomes the ground beneath your feet. For young men raised inside this reality, one dream burns above everything else. Unit 974, the Supreme Leader's Personal Protection Corps. To serve, there means standing close to a living God. For a boy who has worshipped that face his entire life from a distance, that closeness feels like heaven. Kang Jin was 17 when he was selected. He believed every word he had ever been told. He had no idea what darkness was waiting inside. Daytime in the compound was silence, so thick it pressed against your chest. Nothing moved without permission. Kang trained, drilled, and believed fed daily on videos of a flourishing nation and a selfless leader who worked himself to exhaustion for his beloved people. But when darkness fell and the clock crossed 8 in the evening, everything changed. Music erupted from deep inside the compound, loud, pulsing, alive, music that had no business existing in a place of sacred duty. Then, luxury cars began arriving, one by one at the gate. Polished, slow, deliberate. And from those cars stepped girls, 17, 18, 19 years old, some visibly younger. Moving quietly, with eyes that carried something Kang wasn't yet ready to understand. These girls had a name, Kipumjo, Pleasure Squad, a title designed to dress exploitation in the language of patriotism. To make these girls believe that what was being done to them was not a crime. It was honor. It was service. It was the greatest contribution a young woman could make to her nation. Because that is exactly what they had been told since childhood. Just as boys were raised to protect the supreme leader with their lives, girls were raised to believe their bodies existed to please him. Their own mothers told them this. Their teachers confirmed it. The state embedded it so deeply that it no longer felt like an instruction, it felt like identity. Government officials visited schools regularly, walked the hallways with quiet authority, made lists of beautiful girls, noted their ages, filed their names. Weeks later, those girls were summoned for screening virginity tests, medical examinations, made to undress before rooms full of officials who evaluated them like products at an auction. They were forbidden from crying. One girl was rejected because faint childhood vaccination marks remained on her skin. That single imperfection was enough. Those selected were divided into 3 groups: Manjok personal services for the leadership, Hangbok massage and physical attendance, Gamu singing and dancing at private parties. Kang stood guard outside during those nights. He heard the music, he saw the lights, he knew what was happening inside, and the feeling that rose in his chest was not outrage. It was sympathy for the supreme leader, this exhausted, selfless man who deserved relief after carrying a nation on his shoulders all day. That is what perfect brainwashing looks like. It doesn't hide the truth. It reframes it until the truth feels like kindness. Among those selected for Kipum-jo was an 11-year-old girl named Kim Seo, 11 years old. A government official spotted her during a routine school inspection. Her name went on a list, and weeks later her family received the news and responded not with horror, but with tearful gratitude. Because in North Korea, having your daughter selected for the Supreme Leader's pleasure squad was considered one of the greatest honors a family could receive. The propaganda had worked so completely that parents surrendered their children with smiles on their faces, genuinely believing their daughter's suffering was her destiny and her privilege. Kim's screening was clinical and brutal. She was examined, measured, and assessed with cold detachment by men who saw only usefulness. She passed. Then her real education began, not mathematics or literature, but how to move, how to dress, how to exist in whatever form the leadership required. She was assigned to Gamu singing and dancing, which in the terrible arithmetic of that system made her one of the lucky ones. She performed at private parties, cleaned the vast palace-like villas between events, and every day watched her friends disappear into rooms and return permanently changed, quieter, emptier. Something behind their eyes gone and replaced by a stillness that looked like peace but was actually the death of hope. Girls who outlived their usefulness simply vanished. No announcement, no explanation. One day present, the next day gone. And no one asked where, because asking was dangerous. The reason was coldly logical. These girls had been inside rooms where the leadership let its guard down. They had heard conversations spoken in the looseness of alcohol and power. They knew too much to ever be allowed to leave. Freedom was never part of their story. They were held for 10 to 12 years, completely isolated, completely controlled, used until they were considered spent, and then their photographs were passed around to high-ranking officers, like items in a catalogue, and told to choose a wife. The girl's consent was irrelevant. Refusal meant death. Marriage meant a lifetime of continued captivity under a different name. Kim Seo was luckier than most. She made contact with a young man connected to South Korea, built a plan in silence over months, and one day crossed the border and didn't look back. She escaped, she breathed free air, but freedom in North Korea is never truly free, because the bill for your escape is always sent to the people you left behind. When Kim Seo disappeared across the border, government officials arrived at her parents' home in Pyongyang without warning. No paperwork, no hearing. Just a quiet final announcement. Your daughter left, your home now belongs to the state. Pack what you can carry. Her parents, people who had wept with pride the day their daughter was selected, who had believed completely in the system that was now destroying them, were stripped of their home and forcibly relocated to a remote, rural settlement for hard labor. It didn't matter that they had known nothing. It didn't matter that they had done everything right. Their daughter had chosen freedom, and that choice was billed directly to them. Kim's father suffered a heart attack shortly after their relocation. The shock of total collapse, of watching everything he had trusted revealed as a machine that had only ever been using him, broke him physically. He died not long after arriving at the settlement. Her mother survived longer, but survival in those conditions, without medical care, without support, without any future to look toward, was its own slow execution. She died within a year. Kim Seo reached South Korea and rebuilt her life, but she rebuilt it on a foundation of grief that never fully solidified, because the people who had loved her most paid the price of her freedom with their lives. This is how North Korea punishes escape, not always with a bullet. A bullet is too fast, too clean, too merciful. It punishes with years, with grinding displacement, with watching people who loved you dissolve slowly in conditions designed to kill without appearing to kill. And this cruelty is deliberate and precise because a visible execution makes a martyr, but a slow death in a remote labor settlement makes only a warning. Meanwhile, Kim Jong-un's villas hummed with music and light. Between 20 and 30 private luxury residences scattered across the country, each one explained to the public as a working location, because the supreme leader's devotion requires him to be everywhere at once. Citizens heard this and nodded with genuine understanding. Of course, he works so hard for us. One villa mattered above all others strategically. Chongsong, located just 4 to 5 kilometers from the Chinese border. No military force would bomb that close to China. The blast radius crosses the border, and a strike near China is a strike on China. Kim had built his safest shelter, not from concrete alone, but from geopolitics itself, using an entire neighboring nation as an invisible shield drawn on a map. Kang Jin completed his 13 years of service without a single day off, not one holiday, not one family visit, not one morning where his time belonged to himself. 13 years given completely and unconditionally to protecting a man he had been told was divine. When his discharge finally came, he walked out of the compound with two things: a document and a dream. The dream of returning home, of finding his family well, of collecting the life he had been promised in exchange for everything he had surrendered. Because that was the contract. 13 years of total loyalty, and the state rewards you with free university education and a good job and a stable future. Everything you sacrificed returned to you multiplied. He walked through the streets of his hometown and stopped walking. The poverty hit him like something physical. People selling their possessions on street corners just to eat that day. Children in torn clothing moving through rubble. Elderly people sitting in doorways with the blank exhaustion of those who have stopped expecting anything to improve. Infrastructure crumbling, faces hollow and carrying the particular blankness of people who have given up imagining otherwise. This was the nation he had given 13 years to protect. This was the flourishing country he had watched in those training videos every single day. Except those videos had been lies, every frame of them, fabricated and fed to soldiers like Kang to keep them compliant, while the reality outside those compound walls rotted quietly and completely. At a railway station, he saw a body lying beside the tracks. It had been there long enough to begin decomposing. Workers walked past it. Passengers stepped around it. Nobody stopped. Nobody covered it. A human being reduced to an inconvenience that everyone had silently agreed to ignore. Kang stood on that platform and felt something crack inside him that had been holding everything together since the day he was 17 years old, and walked through that gate believing he was walking toward God. The crack was not loud. It made no sound at all, but it ran from the top of everything he believed all the way down to the bottom, and nothing on either side of it would ever sit flush again. Kang applied to the State Security Department. His background was impeccable. 3 generations of military service, 13 years in the Supreme Leader's Personal Protection Unit, a loyalty record that should have opened every door in the country. His application was rejected without explanation. No reason given, no process offered, just a letter and a closed door, and the sudden understanding that the promise had never been real. He tried smaller positions, irregular work, anything that paid enough to survive on. During this time, his wife fell ill with tuberculosis, a disease that kills slowly without treatment and kills certainly without medicine. Kang worked whatever he could find while watching her weaken. He told himself the right opportunity would come. that his service would eventually mean something, that a system couldn't take 13 years from a man and return nothing. He told himself this while counting money that was never sufficient, and watching his wife grow thinner and quieter with each passing month. She died. Not dramatically, not violently, but in the quiet, devastating way that poverty kills gradually, without adequate care. In a country where the resources existed but flowed only toward those whose names appeared on different lists. 3 generations of sacrifice, 13 years of personal devotion. A belief system that had structured every decision of his adult life. A wife, a future, all of it taken. Nothing returned, not even an explanation. The fracture that had opened at that railway station ran all the way through now, and what was left on the other side was not grief alone, but something colder and more useful. Clarity. The specific, undeceivable clarity of a man who has finally seen a thing completely and can never unsee it. Kang Jin was done believing. And a man in North Korea who has stopped believing has only one direction left to move toward the border. After his wife's death, Kang became a broker. Not of goods or money, but of people quietly connecting North Koreans who wanted to escape with the underground networks that could move them across the border. It was the most dangerous work imaginable in a country where even whispering about escape could send your entire family to a labor camp. But Kang had nothing left to lose. The system had consumed everything he had ever offered it and returned nothing. The love he had carried for a supreme leader had curdled into something he couldn't yet name, but could finally see clearly, and seeing it clearly made silence impossible. The escape routes were brutal. The most common path crossed through China over the Tumen River at the border, then thousands of kilometers through Chinese territory towards Southeast Asia, finally reaching a country that would grant asylum. The river crossing alone was lethal. North Korean border guards had shoot-on-sight orders. The current was unpredictable. And on the Chinese side, defectors had no legal status, classified as illegal migrants rather than refugees, meaning Chinese authorities could arrest and return them at any moment. Women caught attempting escape were subjected to forced examinations for evidence of contact with Chinese men. Pregnancies were forcibly terminated. Infants born to repatriated women were killed immediately after birth because a child with foreign parentage could not be permitted to exist inside North Korea. Kang knew all of this in precise detail. He had seen what happened to people who were caught and returned, the interrogations, the camps, the specific and systematic destruction of a human being designed to function simultaneously as punishment and as warning to everyone who had known them. He moved forward anyway, because the alternative was to remain inside a system he now understood completely, and complicity, he had decided, was worse than risk. He helped dozens of people cross before making his own escape in 2016, stepping across the border into a world that was the same planet but an entirely different reality. South Korea felt like a different universe. Kang stood on a street in Seoul and looked at the lights, the traffic, people moving in every direction without checking whether they were being watched, and felt something he didn't immediately have a word for. It took him days to identify it. The feeling was the absence of fear. He had lived with fear so completely woven into every moment of his existence for so long that its removal felt disorienting, almost wrong. Like a sound that has been playing in the background your entire life, suddenly going silent, and the silence itself feeling louder than the noise had. The adjustment was not simple or fast. North Korean defectors go through a resettlement program in South Korea. Education, language support, psychological counseling, practical life skills for a world that operates on entirely different rules. Many defectors have never used an ATM, never chosen what to eat from a menu, never made a single decision about their own time without that time being structured and monitored by the state. The concept of personal preference, of simply wanting something because you want it, not because it has been approved, is genuinely disorienting to people raised inside total control. Freedom, it turns out, is a skill. And like any skill, it has to be learned, practiced, and sometimes failed before it becomes natural. Kang began speaking publicly about what he had witnessed inside. Unit 974, the Pleasure Squad. The 31 people shot in a jungle clearing. The body decomposing at the railway station while workers stepped around it. The wife, who died of tuberculosis in a country that had taken 13 years of her husband's life and returned nothing. He spoke because silence felt like a form of complicity he was no longer willing to carry. He spoke because the people still inside those borders deserved to have the outside world understand precisely, in detail, without softening what their daily reality looked like. And he spoke because he had paid too high a price for his clarity to keep it to himself. Today, approximately 33 million people live inside North Korea. Of those, only a few thousand escape each year. Of those who attempt the crossing, many are caught, many die in the river, and many are returned to a system that treats their attempt at freedom as the worst crime a human being can commit, worse than theft, worse than violence, worse than almost anything except disloyalty to the supreme leader, which is what escape is ultimately classified as. The ones who make it describe crossing the border not as arrival but as rebirth, violent, disorienting. Grief-soaked rebirth into a world so different from the one they left that adjustment takes years and sometimes never fully completes. Many defectors carry guilt that doesn't diminish with time. Not guilt about leaving, but guilt about who was left behind. Parents, siblings, children, sometimes. People who couldn't come, or wouldn't, or didn't know the escape was happening until it was already done. Because you cannot tell your family you're leaving. Telling them makes them complicit. Complicity means the labor camps, the relocation, the slow grinding punishment that Kim Seo's parents received. The kindest thing an escapee can do for their family is disappear without warning and then live forever with the knowledge that their disappearance destroyed the people they loved most. This is the final absence, the silence that remains when a country has trained an entire population not just to obey, but to forget that anything else is possible. North Korea does not survive only through force. It survives through memory control, through the rewriting of truth so early in life that most citizens never develop the mental reference point to question it. When you are told from childhood that the outside world is a lie, that hunger is normal, that sacrifice is love, and that suffering is proof of loyalty, then suffering stops feeling like punishment. It becomes identity. And so the system continues, not because every citizen believes it fully, but because enough of them cannot imagine an alternative without risking everything they have ever known.